Have you ever looked over at your potted plant and wondered, are you lonely? I mean, think about it. In its natural state, it would have been surrounded by other plants touching leaves and roots. We try to mimic the conditions it likes, getting the light just right, and watering it the perfect amount, giving it trellises to grow on, maybe a misting on a daily basis. But what if we're missing a key component? A friend. This is Gritty and Green, a podcast for truly urban gardeners. And I'm your host and friendly neighborhood master gardener, Meredith Nutting. This week, we're talking about relationships, the good, the bad, the ugly, the everlasting. We'll hear about how plants communicate from a Penn Extension scientist, and then answer one of your gardening questions. So let's get growing. No matter where you look on planet Earth, there are relationships between the creatures living in that place. In biology, we call these interactions. They can be short, like an eagle catching a fish, predation. Or a bee visiting a flower, pollination. Or like a monkey eating a papaya and then scampering off before it poos, seed dispersal. These short interactions are really important to how both species evolved. The fish is going to evolve to outswim the eagle, and the eagle is going to evolve to dive faster to catch the fish. They co-evolve together. But then there are longer interactions. We call these symbioses. Commonly, we think of symbiotic relationships as those that benefit both participants. However, there are actually 6 types of symbiotic relationships, and not all of them are good. Mutualism is the one where both species benefit, and there are some super cool examples of that. A classic is the clownfish and the sea anemone. Sea anemones are animals that look like a cross between a flower and a jellyfish. They're stuck to a rock with thick, stubby tentacles filled with a deadly neurotoxin waving with the tide. Most fish would die if they touched it, but not the clownfish. The clownfish has evolved immunity to the anemone's tentacles and hides among them. The clownfish gets a place to hide from predators, and the anemone gets the nutrients that come out of the clownfish. Another cool example is the relationship between honey guides, that's a bird, and people. One group is the Hadza people in Tanzania. This is a bit of a newer relationship. One of the honey guide's favorite food sources is the larva, eggs, and wax, all found inside a beehive. To get it, they alert people to the location of the beehive, and then the people use their tools to open the hive. The honey guides get their protein-rich meal easily, and the people get the sweet, sweet honey. There are so many cool examples of creatures figuring out how to live together, and of course there are a few that you can see in your own garden. Most obviously, bees and flowers. Flowers attract a bee with the sweet nectar, and as the bee goes in to get it, pollen gets stuck to its body. And then the bee flies to the next plant. And voila, the pollen is moved along with it. You probably already knew all that. But I wanted to talk about one bee in particular, the squash bee, Peponasus purinosa, a solitary bee a little larger than a European honeybee. Before those honeybees were even introduced, the squashes of this continent were pollinated by the squash bee. Only female squash bees gather pollen, and they only gather it from members of the Cucurbita genus. Squash flowers bloom early in the morning, and so the bees are early risers, up and pollinating before the honeybees are even out the door. Female squash bees visit the male squash flowers, gathering pollen, before popping inside a female squash flower and dropping it off. It takes a lot of pollen to get the female squash flower to produce a fruit. Those female squash bees carrying pollen have to visit one female squash flower up to 12 times to deliver enough pollen. But if you've got a lot of squash bees, they can pollinate every flower on your plant before the honeybees even start. If you want to find them in your garden, you can go out early, like at dawn, and find them around your squash. You can even very gently squeeze a shriveled up flower, and perhaps you'll hear the buzz of a male squash bee you just woke up from his mid-morning nap. To attract these cute little native bees to your garden, you'll need to leave the soil. They live underground, so digging a lot will disturb them. And of course, they are specialists, so they need a lot of cucurbit pollen. And if no one is planting squash in the area, they may not be around yet. But plant it and they will come. Even if you don't like squash, you could do it for the pollinators. But back to our symbiotic relationships. The opposite of mutualism may be competition. That's when two creatures are both going after a limited resource and both can be negatively affected. It could be in the same species, like male deer fighting over a doe to mate with. Or between species, like how cheetahs and lions eat the same types of prey animals. We see this a lot in our gardens. We have limited resources galore: water, nutrients in the soil, and access to sunlight. In theory, carbon dioxide could be another resource plants fight over in order to photosynthesize, but we have so much of that in the atmosphere that the plants don't need to worry. Making sure everyone has what they need is the gardener's job. It starts with deciding what to plant and having some restraint on not planting too much for your space. We'll get back to all this in a minute. Along with mutualism and competition, gardens contain another symbiotic relationship, and it can be a little more gruesome. Parasitism. This one is cool in a horror film kind of way. It's when one species benefits and one is harmed. And unlike predation, where the interaction is quick, parasitism can take a long time. One of the most terrifying examples is the cordyceps fungus in ants. There's a reason that this fungus inspired a video game and now a TV show. The fungus spore drills into the ant's exoskeleton and then starts to feed on its organs. It spreads throughout its body. But the ant is still alive. The fungus controls its muscles, allowing it to walk, staggered and robotic, like a zombie. Until one day when the fungus is ready to reproduce. It forces the ant to walk somewhere with the optimal conditions. It climbs up a branch or a twig and into the light. It makes the ant bite down hard, locking it in place before it dies. And then the cordyceps starts to fruit. It emerges from the ant like an alien, usually in vibrantly colored tentacles. Eventually, it releases spores that go off to infect other ants. It can wipe out entire colonies this way. It's wild. If you haven't seen a video, you should go look it up. I'll put one in the show notes. In our own gardens, we rely on parasites to do a lot of our pest control, usually in wasp form. The three most common types are Brachinid, Chalcid, and Echineumin. These all have what looks like a stinger, but is actually just an ovipositor, an egg-laying organ. And they don't sting people. Brachinid wasps are small, like 1/4 inch and smaller. They lay their eggs in aphids, tent caterpillars, and hornworms. Once the eggs hatch out of larvae, they go about eating their host. Then they form a cocoon and are transformed from a larva into an adult wasp. When they're ready, they fly off and eat nectar and search for other garden pests to lay eggs on. The Chalcid wasps are even smaller. They're one of the smallest insects, actually. It lays its egg inside the eggs of other insects. You won't usually see them because they're busy pollinating flowers and laying eggs, but if you did, they'd look like teeny flies with big eyes and a metallic sheen. And then there are the Echineumin wasps. There are over 10,000 species in this family, and some of them can be kind of scary. Their bodies only get to be about half an inch long, but their ovipositor, the thing that looks like a stinger but only lays eggs, can be 5 inches long. It's a little intimidating. But they're out in your garden doing the hard work of pollinating plants and looking to lay eggs in all sorts of garden pests, including hornworms that love tomato plants. One year, I found a big, fat green hornworm on my tomato plant that had been parasitized by a barachnid wasp. It was very much alive, but it had these little papery white cocoons all over its back. And those cocoons were being preyed on by a yellow jacket. The hornworm was thrashing around, the yellow jacket was pulling the cocoons apart, and there was a green goo dripping down. As a former wildlife filmmaker, I couldn't take my eyes away. I'll put links to the pictures in the show notes. I mean, it is just amazing what you can see in your own garden if you start to observe the little things. Okay, so I said there were 6 types of symbiotic relationships, and we've talked about 3: mutualism, competition, and parasitism. The other 3 are important, just not as exciting. They are commensalism, where one species benefits and the other one doesn't really notice, like barnacles on a whale or birds in a tree. One species gets the benefit of protection, while the other one isn't really harmed or helped. And amensalism, where one species is harmed and the other is unaffected. Think like animals walking on grass and killing it. The grass is dead, but the animal probably doesn't even notice or meant it. Then there's neutralism, where 2 species may interact, but neither really seems affected. There's no real proven examples of this one, but it's a helpful term when you need to describe insignificant interactions as a biologist. So that's your big biology lesson for today, and now let's get back to your garden where we can use these relationships to your advantage. Companion planting, or planting with different plants together to promote growth. This could benefit just one plant or everyone involved. Companion planting is kind of necessary in our small gardens and containers because everything is close together. And if you want to plant more than one thing, your best bet is intentional companion planting. Companion planting hasn't had a lot of research to back it up. Either it hasn't been done, or in the cases where it has, the results are sometimes inconclusive. Instead, it is based off of years and years, I'm talking thousands of years, of trial and error by gardeners around the world. One of the most famous examples of companion planting around here is the Lenape Nation's 3 sisters: beans, corn, and squash. These 3 plants grown together produce more food than when they are grown separately. The Lenape were just one of the indigenous people that grew them together. Legend has it that there were 3 sisters. The eldest was clothed in a pale green dress with yellow hair blowing in the breeze. She was tall and strong, but her feet were always burning from the hot summer sun. The middle sister was thin and quick, but she wasn't very strong. She made a lot of food, but if she wasn't held up, she would just lay in the mud, wet and dirty. The youngest sister wore a yellow dress, and she was short and fat and very hungry. One day, the middle sister, thin and weak, asked the eldest if she would lift her up so that she wasn't laying on the ground. And in exchange, she would feed her tall, strong sister. The eldest agreed. And then the youngest sister, always hungry, proposed that in exchange for some of the quick middle sister's food, she could provide shade on their feet and give them space to grow strong. The eldest and middle sister quickly agreed, and so the 3 sisters worked together. The eldest provided support for the middle sister, providing nutritious food, and the youngest gave them shelter so they all grew stronger together than they would apart. The 3 sisters, of course, were corn, the tall, strong sister, beans, the weak but nourishing sister, and squash, the short, protective sister. The squash provides shade to hold moisture into the soil and suppress weeds around the corn provides a support for the bean to grow up, and the bean provides nitrogen, one of the most essential nutrients plants need and also one of the most limited. How do beans provide nitrogen? Well, through a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. It's all coming back around. Legumes, beans included, have nodules on their roots filled with a bacteria that can fix nitrogen. They take the nitrogen gas in the air, which plants cannot use, and split it apart and add some hydrogen to create ammonia, which plants can absorb. This process is called nitrogen fixation. So while the bacteria is busy doing all of that, the legume gives them carbohydrates, fuel, food. And because of this mutualistic relationship, legumes have become great companion plants because they nourish the soil. Of course, people 10,000 years ago didn't know that. They just knew that when they planted beans with the corn and squash, they grew better. So some plants, like legumes, add nutrients to the soil. And some plants break up the soil with long taproots, like carrots and potatoes. And some, like melon and tomatoes, pull up water and nutrients buried deep into the soil. Looking underground is one way to decide if plants will grow well together. Another is looking on the surface. You don't want to grow plants that will be competing for light or space. Planting tall, thin plants among sprawling, low plants like the corn and the squash is one way to companion plant without creating competition for light. You can also purposefully use one to shade another. Like some folks like to plant cold-loving lettuces shaded under a cucumber or squash grown on an inclined trellis. Another way for looking for companion plants is looking at the pests that bother them. Is there a way to deter pests from going to one plant with another plant? And the answer is yes, there's lots of ways. It can be with smell, like in the case of marigolds, whose strong aromas deter many garden pests away from the whole area, including the plants you're trying to grow for food. Or these plants can attract the pests to themselves and away from your intended crop plants, like nasturtiums. They are great at attracting aphids away from tomatoes and kale, among other plants. We call these trap plants. They're kind of sacrificial. We use them to be eaten by pests so that our food plants are left untouched. Another way of looking for companion plants for a healthy garden is their ability to attract both pollinators and predatory insects that will keep pests at bay. One surefire way to do this is to add native plants to your garden if possible. Some of the best plants to add if you can are members of the carrot family. That would be your native golden Alexander, but also parsley, dill, and fennel. These will attract black swallowtail butterflies who lay their eggs on these species, but also a lot of predatory wasps. For bigger predators like ladybugs and soldier beetles, you'll want things like coneflower, goldenrod, sunflower, and yarrow. To protect your brassicas, that's your kales and your broccolis, if you need a refresher, go back to the episode about vegetables. We get into it. Anyway, to protect your kales and broccolis from pests, you can go for your spicy brassicas, like mustards or yellow rocket, or you could go for sweet Elysium. You can find a lot of resources online about what is the best companion for every plant you'd ever want to grow. These can be really helpful in designing your garden. The three sisters may not be right for the city. The corn probably needs too much space to pollinate, and the squash may be crowding your garden. But let's look at a few combinations that you can grow together in containers. Container planting is great for the city. You can do it in your backyard, window box, roof, or a sidewalk, anywhere that you have space to hold a container. But resources like water and nutrients go quicker in a container than a raised bed in the ground. So getting a self-watering container and adding fertilizers regularly will probably help you out. The bigger the container, the easier it will be on you. Along with that advice, I wouldn't recommend putting plants that need a lot of nutrients in with each other. For example, tomatoes and peppers are both nightshades that like a lot of sun, water, and nutrients and can be great companions because they need all the same growing conditions. But that means you're going to have to make sure they get a lot of water and nutrients if they're in a container together. An easier way to go would be to plant a heavy-feeding food plant with a pest-deterring flowering plant or herb. And let's not forget about the container gardening principles we learned about in the first episode of the season about designing gardens. Taking the principle of thrillers, fillers, and spillers, let's start with a thrilling tomato climbing up a tomato cage with plump red fruits clustering on the vine. And then fill it with some small-leafed, clumping Greek basil. It grows smaller and bushier than other types of basil. They both love the sun, and the basil will actually enhance the flavor of the tomato and deter the horned worms and aphids. For some extra pest control, let's put in a spiller, nasturtiums. Not only are the leaves and flowers edible, but they deter pests as well. Or how about borage, a tall, bushy herb with purple star-shaped flowers and slightly fuzzy leaves. Blooming from June through October in our area, it provides interest for both people and pollinators. Borage is also a good trap plant for slugs and snails who love to eat our filler and spiller, strawberries. The main part of the plant will be covering the top of the soil with big leaves, preventing the water from evaporating. And by encouraging the plump red berries to drape over the lip of your pot, you'll not only provide interest, but your strawberries won't get dirty and eaten by bugs. More for you. Or for another container of companions, if you want to go down, try carrots growing mainly underground but with delicate fringed leaves. Try planting those with chives that grow stiffly upwards, eventually blooming into crisp, edible purple flowers. The chives can improve the growth and flavor of the carrot and deter aphids. And then let's add a thriller. The pea plant with round leaves growing up a trellis, or if you want to go native, an American groundnut with rows of pointed leaves. Both have cute little purplish flowers and provide nitrogen to the soil, but the American groundnut has the benefit both of being a native plant and also growing edible tubers. Though a lot of this garden is under the soil, the leaves provide a lot of textures, giving it some great interest. These combinations are really fun to come up with based off of which plants grow well in containers and which grow well together, but the test will be if they work. I'd love to hear if you try one. Email me at grittyandgreen@Cool Goon Productions if you attempt one of these or try your own container companion garden, and let me know if it worked or if it didn't. It's all an experiment, even if it's not strictly science. But this week we have an actual scientist. Last winter, I attended a virtual continuing education talk about plant communication for my Master Gardener certification, and I knew immediately that I wanted to learn more. So I called up the Penn Extension scientist that led it.
My name is Catherine Pugh. I'm a forestry and wildlife educator for Penn State Extension. I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, in a rural Pennsylvania small town in the forest, and went to Kutztown University for my undergraduate degree in biology, where I focused on organismal ecology, but really fell in love with the field of ethnobotany. It was something that was just kind of brought up in my first botany class, and clung to this idea of being an ethnobotanist one day, someone who studies this relationship between people and plants in the environment. And that has always kind of been a through line in my work. I then finished undergrad and hiked the Appalachian Trail for 6 months, and doing that was a really fun way to take a break and get connected with the forests that I grew up in, and didn't really feel like I had as much of a connection to as a child, but now, or at that time, was really intimately getting to know. From there, I moved into this world of ethnobotany more seriously and went to graduate school at Penn State, and I have a master's in forest resources.
Catherine worked with Dr. Eric Burkhart studying the relationship between people and wild ramps. Both learning from and teaching to the people she spoke with gave her the skills and experience in her role now as an educator for the Pennsylvania Extension offices, where amongst other things she prepares lectures and workshops with intriguing titles like plant communication.
Yeah, that word communication is one that I chose when developing my presentation on tree communication. And I intentionally picked that word communication because people understand what that is. You know, we're communicating now with words verbally, but we're also communicating with body language. And though I don't want to anthropomorphize plants and contribute human characteristics to non-human organisms, it is a useful way to just understand what's going on in the communication being the signals that are sent between organisms. So whether that's in the air or in the ground, physically connected. So it's kind of the sharing of signals and messages is what I mean by communication. There's kind of two groups of signals. The first is the above ground communication. And so these are the volatile organic compounds being emitted from plants. Volatile organic compounds means these are compounds that are then turned into gases in the air. And so they can waft from one individual to another.
Sometimes these compounds are detected by other plants, but a lot of times these signals are used to communicate with insects and other critters in the garden.
There will be plants that give off chemical signals and create kind of camouflage around a neighboring plant. So you could think of planting marigolds in your garden, right? Marigolds often are planted to deter critters that want to munch on something else nearby, right? And so they're there as a deterrent, and maybe it's because the animal will get to the marigolds on the edge of your patch first and recognize that they don't like to eat those and not go any further. But it could also be that it's a scent. So it's smelling like everything in this area, if you're an insect, might smell more like marigolds, which is toxic to them, and they won't recognize that their favorite food is tucked in the middle. Just generally, when you have fragrant plants in your garden, it's often attracting insects like beetles, who are considered to be more primitive in their evolutionary development. And so they rely on that scent chemical to find their plants to pollinate or to get, a nectar reward. And so when you have really fragrant plants, you're often attracting things like beetles. When you have plants that smell not as nice, that have maybe like a dead or decaying kind of fragrance, and maybe smells like a little bit rotten, that's a scent that is used to attract flies, because flies are looking for dead and decaying things. Roadkill is an example, to go and lay their eggs, or they're just drawn to those smells. So depending on the smell, you can attract different types of pollinators. But as far as other organisms, color is more important to things like bees, who rely on ultraviolet radiation. So we're not seeing it with our eyes, it's outside of our visible light spectrum. But lots of other organisms are able to see these types of colors and are attracted. And sometimes flowers will have like concentric rings to kind of act as a bullseye and to pull in, to be like, this is exactly where you want to go to find our pollen.
So plants have all sorts of ways they communicate for different reasons, but all of them are to help them survive. And the volatile organic compounds are a key component of their above-ground communication.
And sometimes these chemicals are always produced as a defense, and we call these constitutive chemicals. And so poison ivy is a great example of this. They're always producing what we call urushiol oils, found throughout the entire plant. It's always there. If you come in contact as a human, or as maybe other animals come in contact, the oil will be passed off and create dermatitis. So that's like a chemical that is always produced that can be defense. But you can also have chemicals that are induced. And so these aren't always being produced by the plant, because it's kind of costly to have these chemicals always on hand. And so it's a chemical that is produced as a response to something. And oftentimes that response is herbivory, or it's somebody munching on a plant, whether that's an insect or a mammal, whatever.
When spider mites start to feast on lima bean plants, for example, the bean plant releases volatile organic compounds that waft into the air, doing two things. First, they attract predators to come and eat the spider mites. But secondly, those compounds are sent by nearby plants, who in turn produce chemicals to stop the spider mites from feeding on them. Whether the signal is meant for the neighboring beans or not, they are able to arm themselves, and perhaps one day they'll repay the favor.
And so that's one kind of group, these volatile above ground chemicals, but then there's also below ground communication happening. And this is often from plant to plant, but connected physically with the mycorrhizal network. And so that word, we can detangle it. Myco refers to fungi, and rhizal means root. So it's the fungi associated with plant roots. plants are physically touching underground a lot of times when grown together. If you look at a forest, you see these individual trees, but below ground, their roots are sending signals, and it's by way of this network of the fungal network below that's connecting them physically.
And it's not just trees that have this relationship with fungi.
83% to 90% of plants have associations with fungal networks.
So plants can communicate with each other above ground and below ground. But why?
It's an interesting kind of thought experiment, because we're at this point in our scientific discovery where we can't quite know motivations. And when we always ask that question of why something's happening, in this case, it's like, what is the motivation behind sending signals? And so if we, again, kind of use our human understanding, we can come up with some hypotheses. So signals might be sending between individuals as like an act of altruism. And so one tree might be munched on by an insect, and as a response, chemicals are emitted in the air as volatile organic compounds. And those chemicals might be sent out perhaps intentionally or perhaps just because they're released. And it could be an altruistic act where that initial plant is sending out like an SOS signal, like, hey, everybody, here's a warning, I'm being munched on, get your defenses primed. So it could be altruism. It could be mutualism, where the signal's being sent from the sender and the receivers sometime in the future might return the favor. Or it could just be like eavesdropping, where neighboring plants recognize that there's a stress signal in the air as a result of herbivory, and they recognize it as stress, so they get ready to respond with and have their defenses primed. So it's kind of like humans can do the same sort of thing. We're eavesdropping all the time, but like if you have a signal sent in the air, say you smell smoke, that is not a signal intentionally sent to a person, but you are receptive and notice that that's a stress signal, and you're now responding in the same kind of way. So could be altruism, could be mutualism, could be eavesdropping. There's still lots of questions to be answered, and perhaps we're not quite there in our scientific discovery, but maybe in the future we'll understand this more.
We may never know for sure the answer to why plants communicate, but a lot of research has gone into how they communicate, particularly underground with these mycorrhizal networks.
There are kind of two groups of, well, there are three groups of mycorrhizal fungi associated with roots. One is called ericoid mycorrhizal fungi, and that's just associated with one specific family of plants, ericaceous plants, things like rhododendron and blueberries. But then it's estimated to be 98% of plants have an association with what's called arbuscular mycorrhizae. And that word arbuscular comes from the root arb, meaning tree-like. And so arbuscular mycorrhizae are fungi that actually get into the plant roots. They get internal, and they form these like extensions that kind of look like a tree. And then only about 2% of plants have what's called ectomycorrhizae. And so that word ecto means on the outside. And so these fungi are in association with the plant roots, but they don't go within the cells. They just kind of stay on the outside of the roots.
No matter the species, each of these three types of fungi have a relationship with the trees growing above them.
So they're connected, and they have this mutualistic relationship, meaning both parties benefit, the plants and the fungi. And so plants are photosynthesizing, so they're creating sugars, thank you to the sun, and the fungi can't do that. So those sugars are being passed along to the fungi, and in return, the fungi do a much better job at pulling nutrients from the soil. And so they get the nutrients and can pass it along to the trees. It's unclear how much of this is like in goodwill, or if this is happening, in some kind of difference in concentration. So that's essentially it. The trees and the fungi have this interesting relationship where they both benefit.
The tree and the fungi aren't just connected together. The mycorrhizal network actually creates an underground web connecting the trees of the forest beneath the soil. So while you may be sitting in the woods scrolling the World Wide Web on your phone, the trees below are sending signals and sugars to one another using the Wood Wide Web.
When we look at a forest, you might think that only one tree species might just communicate with the same type of tree, but actually these signals are crossing all kinds of species. It's not just one hemlock to another hemlock. It could be the hemlock to the rhododendron, to the blueberries, to the wildflowers. And it's happening above ground and below ground. And it's also happening from old, mature individuals with a prominent tree canopy position to seedlings or saplings that are starting, to find a spot but have yet to get position where they can even get enough sunlight to produce sugars themselves. So it's really dynamic. And so when we look at a forest, we're not really looking at individuals that are separate. We're looking at truly a community that are sharing all kinds of information.
When I first heard about this phenomenon through an interview with Suzanne Simard and her work in Vancouver, it immediately changed the way I looked at the forest. It wasn't just a bunch of trees, it was a community. A connected family, both biological and chosen. It's between mothers nurturing their young until they get a chance to grow on their own. It's connecting the past and the present, with the dead giving their body to the living through this mysterious, nearly invisible underground network. It honestly still gives me goosebumps on my arms and tears in my eyes. And so, of course, I started to wonder about the trees I know, the ones in my garden, the trees growing along the streets and in the parks. Are they connected? Do they talk to each other and nurture each other and support each other? Or are they isolated, living on their own?
I would think that they're probably doing a better job of communicating above ground in these urban sites. And it's because urban soils are typically poor quality. And that's because when we break down the layers of the soil, you have some kind of growth median at the top, whether that's natural or not, was placed there after construction. And then below that is just a mineral substance, again, probably put there after construction. And usually below that is an impervious surface. And so as far as fungal networks go, there's not as much space to be able to move in those settings. And then on top of that, we have all kinds of physical barriers that are breaking up spaces that ends up reducing connection. So every time you have sealed roads, that's blocking the ability for these fungal networks to be connected. And then lastly, pollution is a huge factor when it comes to urban sites. And so salt from our roads can disrupt and lead to decline in fungal networks. Inorganic matter in urban soils also plays a role. But good news is that having herbaceous plants around in these sites helps to foster the fungal communities. You don't want just turf. You want a community of plants. So ideally a mixture of different species so that there's, again, more opportunity for different types of fungi to be associated with one plant species, and then together they can be connected underground. But beyond that, trying to foster your mycorrhizal network is probably the most helpful first. You could see some of the mycorrhizal networks by digging down into the soil. If you see these like little white threads in the soil, that indicates that you have at least some type of fungal network happening. If you don't have any mycorrhizal fungus in your soil to begin with, you're not going to just develop that. And also, as you disturb the soil, you're disturbing those fungal networks too. So as you're gardening, if you're really tilling up the soil each year, you're really disturbing it in a way that can break apart that network. So I recommend not doing too much tilling as best you can. Certainly there are times you might be first year at your community garden and realize that it needs a lot of help. So you might do some extra soil amendments that year. There are some products that exist on the market for fungal inoculants, and some of them are kind of powders and others can be more of like a liquid injection. And I have seen some results suggesting that they are helpful, but there really needs to be more studies on it. So I have not seen any that say that inoculants have been detrimental in any way. So that's at least good news. I always recommend growing perennials. One, because I'm an advocate for native plants. And so anytime you can grow native plants is great. And the perennial plantings, say you got an inoculum, you would hopefully only need to apply it one time. Because in the perennial system, you won't be disturbing it year after year like you would in an annual system. And so, I recommend looking into some of these inoculants and try some out just to see.
You can even try to inoculate your container gardens with these fungi.
They don't do well when they get completely dried out most of the time. That's important to know. Just in general, fungal networks, they don't prefer to be completely dry. So just keep that in mind. You don't want your soil to be like saturated, soaking wet, because that's probably not good for what you're trying to grow. But try to be mindful not to let it get completely bone dry. And then having a few different species in a pot will be helpful. I recognize there's only so much space in a garden pot, but having a few species is nice.
You heard it, folks. Your plants really do want friends. That was Catherine Pugh, a Penn Extension educator in forestry and wildlife. If you want to learn more about the wood wide web, I highly recommend Peter Wollenben's The Hidden Life of Trees and checking out Susan Simard's research and memoir, Finding the Mother Tree. I'll put links to both of those in the show notes. And now it's time to answer one of your gardening questions. A few weeks back, I attended Green Philly's Eco Fair at the Cherry Street Pier. I asked people to write down their gardening questions, and I got a pretty interesting one. How beneficial are worms in your garden? And is there such thing as a worm garden? So the first thing you should know about worms is that they are all introduced species. The last ice age, about 10,000 years ago, wiped them all out in most of Northern America, including our area. Worms were introduced from Europe and Asia when colonizers and global trade arrived. Because of this, they do pose ecological issues in forests and wild areas. However, we're talking about gardens. In your garden, worms can be your best friend. They move around underneath your soil as natural aerators that improve water flow and help your plant's roots grow. They also very quickly decompose organic material and poop out fertilizer, so they're great for the nutrient cycle. Most worms in our garden are doing a lot of work for you. So then there's the question of a worm garden. I didn't get to speak to the person that wrote this question, so I'm not exactly sure what they meant. But you can create some nice feeding stations for the worms in your garden, and they will give you some great fertilizer in return. This is vermiculture. You can do this with an in-ground composting bin or with a worm tower. I happen to have both. The in-ground composting bin is basically a bucket with holes large enough for worms and other little soil critters to get in and out of. And a lid. A lid is important. I put mine in a raised bed, so it's mostly buried but with the lid accessible. And then I filled it with food scraps. The worms can come in and out, eating the food scraps and eventually leaving me with nutrient-rich worm castings. That's their poop. It basically feels like soil. I pull it all out and then I spread it through my garden, and then I fill the bin up again with more food scraps. It's a great way to compost, and it's right there in the ground. I don't have to think about it. A worm bin works pretty similarly, but the worms live in an enclosed tower of stacked bins. The bins have holes in the bottom so the worms can move between the layers of the tower, eating food scraps and then laying eggs. These systems can be ideal for indoor composters in the city. I'll put a link in the show notes for more information. That's all for this episode of Gritty and Green. Thanks so much for joining me to learn all about the relationships that we can see in our garden. And a special thanks to Catherine Pugh from Penn Extension for telling us all about how plants communicate. If you're liking this podcast, please subscribe, rate it, recommend it to your friends. It really helps me continue to do this work that I love. And if you have a garden question of your own, email me at grittyandgreen@coolgoonproductions.com. I'll be back soon for an all-new episode of Gritty and Green. Gritty and Green is presented by Green Philly in collaboration with Cool Goon Productions. It was written, directed, and edited by me, Meredith Nutting. Theme music by Kazuya. If you want more information about local sustainability, go to greenphl.com.